Over the past few weeks, a quiet but consistent thread has begun to emerge across several of golf's most credible outlets. Golf Digest, Golf Channel, and Yahoo Sports have all independently reported on behind-the-scenes discussions connected to the 2026 Masters. None of them claim a finalized decision. None suggest an official announcement is imminent. But taken together, their reporting points to something highly unusual: a deliberate internal review of how the tournament approaches 2026. When multiple respected publications start circling the same subject without coordination, it's rarely coincidence. And that's where the intrigue begins. What makes this situation especially striking is the silence from Augusta National itself. There has been no press release, no denial, no carefully worded clarification. And historically, that silence is often the loudest signal of all. Augusta doesn't respond to speculation unless it has to. Instead, it allows narratives to develop naturally, stepping in only when the moment suits them. That pattern has fueled the belief that these reports aren't speculative noise, but early indicators of a decision already in motion, one simply not ready for daylight yet. The reason this matters so much is simple. At Augusta, there are no small changes. A minor adjustment elsewhere in golf might be a footnote. At the Masters, it becomes a defining moment. Field composition, qualification criteria, eligibility pathways, these aren't administrative details here. They shape careers, legacies, and the competitive balance of the most iconic week in golf. Even the suggestion of recalibration forces players, fans, and insiders to rethink what the future might look like, which leads to the question hovering over the entire sport right now. Why would the Masters, the most tradition-bound tournament in golf, even consider change at this moment? And what does that say about where the game is heading next? Strip away the speculation, and a clear pattern begins to form. Across Golf Channel, Golf Digest, and Yahoo Sports, the reporting aligns on one central point. Augusta National is reassessing how the 2026 Masters field is constructed. Not the date, not the venue, but who gets the invitation. The agreement between outlets is striking, and that's usually the first sign something real is happening behind closed doors. The most concrete reporting comes from Golf Channel, which has focused on early projections for the 2026 field. Their coverage highlights a growing emphasis on ranking-based inclusions and how certain qualification pathways may carry more weight than before. Importantly, this isn't framed as expansion or contraction, but refinement. Subtle shifts in criteria that could change the profile of the field without changing its size. On the surface, it sounds technical, but the implications run far deeper. Golf Digest takes the analysis a step further by asking what those adjustments mean for the identity of the Masters itself. Their reporting suggests that even small recalibrations can quietly tilt the balance between tradition and modern competitive reality. Who earns a spot, how long past champions remain exempt, and how international players are evaluated all shape the character of the tournament. Change the inputs, and the feel of the week inevitably evolve, say whether Augusta admits it or not. What's crucial here is separating confirmed reporting from informed speculation. Confirmed: internal discussion, early modeling, and scenario planning for 2026. Speculation: how far those changes might go, and who they ultimately affect most. And through it all, one truth remains constant: Augusta National never leaks by accident, which raises the question of why these stories are surfacing now. From the outside, any adjustment tied to the Masters can feel jarring. But internally, the logic is far more measured. Augusta National Golf Club operates in a version of golf that no longer exists in isolation. The rise of global tours, shifting alliances, and fragmented competitive pathways have created a landscape where comparability is harder than ever. For an invitational built on selecting the right field, those pressures don't disappear just because tradition demands silence. And that's where the tension begins. One of the biggest challenges Augusta faces is ranking system volatility. World rankings no longer tell a simple, universally trusted story. Different tours carry different strengths of field, limited event schedules distort data, and elite players can fall or rise rapidly without a clear reflection of form. According to coverage from Yahoo Sports, this uncertainty has forced governing bodies and tournament organizers to rethink how merit is measured. For Augusta, whose credibility rests on the quality of its field, ignoring that reality would be the bigger risk. That's why this moment isn't about radical reinvention. It's about prevention. Quiet adjustments now reduce the chance of visible controversy later. By refining qualification pathways before they become problematic, Augusta protects the competitive balance of the tournament without having to react publicly under pressure. It's a controlled response to instability elsewhere in the sport, designed to preserve the Masters' authority rather than undermine it, and that distinction matters more than it first appears. History supports this approach. Past changes to eligibility, exemptions, and international access were once met with skepticism, even outrage. Yet over time, they became accepted parts of the Masters fabric. Fans adjusted, players adapted, the tournament endured. Seen through that lens, the 2026 discussions don't signal disruption. They signal continuity by other means. And that may be the most Augusta decision of all. The most immediate impact of any adjustment will be felt by the players living on the margins. Fringe qualifiers, those hovering around ranking thresholds or relying on late-season form, operate in a narrow window where opportunity is never guaranteed. A subtle shift in qualification logic can turn a career-defining invitation into a near miss. These are players for whom the Masters isn't an annual expectation, but a rare opening. If the criteria tighten or prioritize different signals of performance, that margin becomes even thinner and far less forgiving. International players sit at the center of this conversation as well. Global pathways into elite golf have never been more complex, and comparing form across tours is increasingly difficult. Small recalibrations may benefit those competing regularly against top-tier fields, while disadvantaging players whose schedules or tours don't translate cleanly into ranking points. Over time, that could reshape the geographic makeup of the field, subtly altering the Masters' global identity without ever announcing a philosophical shift. Then there's the delicate balance between veterans and emerging talent. Long-standing exemptions reward history, loyalty, and legacy, values Augusta has always respected. But modern competitive reality demands that current form matters too. Adjustments that favor relevance over reputation could accelerate generational turnover, quietly shortening windows that once stayed open longer. For younger players, that may create urgency. For veterans, it could feel like time suddenly moving faster than expected. What makes this moment particularly consequential is how lasting the effects could be. One altered pathway doesn't just change a single year's field, it changes momentum, preparation, and career planning. For some players, 2026 won't represent a breakthrough opportunity. It may mark the moment they realize a door has started to close. And in a tournament where chances are limited by design, timing has never mattered more. If history is any guide, Augusta National Golf Club won't rush to clarify anything. Silence has always been part of how the Masters communicates authority. By refusing to comment, Augusta allows expectations to reset organically, without locking itself into language it may later regret. In many ways, that restraint is the message. When the Masters chooses not to speak, it's often because it's still shaping the outcome and prefers the world to wait. The next real signals won't come through headlines or press conferences. They'll arrive quietly in familiar places. Official invitations will begin to tell a story before anyone explains it. Qualification confirmations will reveal which pathways matter most and which have subtly faded in importance. Even the phrasing used by tournament officials, historically precise and deliberate, may shift just enough to indicate a recalibration. At Augusta, wording has always been policy, if you know how to read it. What's important to understand is what this moment is not. It's not an abandonment of tradition, and it's not a reactionary move driven by outside noise. Everything about the reported approach suggests preservation, not disruption. By refining the framework now, Augusta protects the integrity of the competition before inconsistencies elsewhere force its hand. The Masters has never waited for crisis to act. It prefers quiet alignment over public correction. That's why 2026 already feels different, even without an announcement. Not because the Masters is changing who it is, but because it's choosing how it wants to remain relevant on its own terms. And as the pieces slowly fall into place, one question lingers longer than any rumor ever could. Is this the moment the Masters quietly entered a new era? In professional golf, there are players who follow the script, and then there is John Daly. For more than 3 decades, Daly has existed outside the sport's polished image, building a career on raw talent, brutal honesty, and a refusal to say what he's supposed to say. Fans don't look to Daly for rehearsed sound bites or diplomatic answers. They listen because when he speaks, it's usually uncomfortable, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why his latest comments have sent shockwaves through the game, because this time they landed differently. Recently, Daly delivered a series of blunt remarks aimed directly at the PGA Tour, criticizing how the organization treats the people who actually make the sport function. His words weren't buried in sarcasm or brushed off as humor. There was no wink, no grin, no attempt to soften the blow. Instead, Daly spoke plainly, calling out what he sees as long-standing issues that many inside golf quietly acknowledge, but rarely challenge in public. And when a figure like Daly chooses clarity over caution, people start paying attention. What makes this moment different is intent. This wasn't a reaction to a bad round, a controversial ruling, or a fleeting headline. Daly wasn't defending himself or promoting a cause. His comments were measured, deliberate, and rooted in frustration that's been building for years. That alone raises eyebrows, because Daly has never needed attention. Attention has always followed him anyway. So why now? That question is what turns a quote into a warning, because when one of golf's most independent voices speaks this clearly, it suggests something deeper is shifting beneath the surface. And if Daly is saying this out loud, others may already be thinking it quietly, which is where the real story begins. When you strip away the headlines and reaction, what John Daly actually said was far more calculated than many initially assumed. According to reporting from Golf Magic and Essentially Sports, Daly focused on one issue that rarely gets center stage in professional golf: the treatment of caddies. He questioned why the people carrying bags, managing yardages, and traveling week after week receive so little structural support from the very system they help sustain. It wasn't an emotional appeal, it was a practical critique of how modern golf distributes its resources, and that's where the discomfort begins. From there, Daly widened the lens. He pointed to financial inequality within the sport, highlighting how revenue continues to flow upward while many essential contributors operate with minimal security. His argument wasn't that elite players are overpaid, but that the ecosystem beneath them is underprotected. Compared to rival tours that now offer travel stipends, guaranteed support, and clearer safety nets, Daly suggested the PGA Tour has been slow to respond. In a rapidly changing golf landscape, standing still can be just as damaging as moving backward. Crucially, Daly framed this as a systemic failure, not a personal grievance. He spoke about conversations he's had over years with players, caddies, and insiders who share the same concerns but feel constrained by contracts or politics. That context matters because it places his comments within a broader undercurrent of frustration that's been building quietly across the tour. Daly didn't introduce a new problem. He verbalized an old one, and that's what gives his words weight. Daly isn't chasing relevance, influence, or leverage. He's lived through multiple eras of professional golf and watched the business side harden over time. When someone with nothing to gain chooses honesty over diplomacy, it stops sounding like criticism and starts sounding like testimony. For the PGA Tour, the timing of John Daly's comments could hardly be worse. The organization is already navigating one of the most turbulent periods in its history, with the continued pressure from LIV Golf forcing long-standing assumptions about loyalty, money, and tradition into the open. Players who once would never have considered leaving are now weighing options, and fans are questioning whether the PGA still represents the future of the sport. In that environment, even a small crack can widen quickly. What complicates matters further is the growing fracture in player loyalty. Some remain fiercely protective of the PGA's legacy, while others feel the tour has been slow to protect their interests beyond the top tier. This has created a quiet but persistent divide, not loud enough to dominate headlines, but deep enough to undermine unity. Against that backdrop, perception has become just as important as performance, and right now the PGA is struggling to control the narrative. That's why John Daly matters so much in this moment. Daly isn't negotiating a contract, he isn't lobbying for a role, he isn't defending a decision or justifying a move. He has no leverage to gain and no approval to chase. That makes his words difficult to dismiss because they aren't transactional, they're observational. When criticism comes from someone with skin in the game, it can be debated. When it comes from someone with nothing at stake, it lingers. This is what turns Daly's comments into something symbolic. He's a major champion, a survivor of multiple eras, and a figure who commands respect even from those who disagree with him. By saying publicly what many whisper privately, Daly didn't create a crisis. He illuminated one, and once that light is on, it's very hard to turn it off. The reaction to John Daly's comments wasn't driven by shock alone, it was driven by recognition. For many fans, Daly represents something increasingly rare in modern professional golf: authenticity. In a sport that has become carefully managed, sponsor-friendly, and relentlessly polished, Daly stands out because he never fully conformed to that image. His career has always felt human, messy, and real, and that's precisely why people still listen when he speaks. Daly's reputation for saying what others won't is not a marketing angle. It's a pattern. He has never been the spokesperson of an institution, and he's never tried to be. When he speaks, there's no press release behind it and no brand manager cleaning up the edges. That blunt honesty cuts through layers of corporate messaging, and fans instinctively recognize the difference between a statement designed to reassure and one meant to reflect reality. In moments like this, the contrast couldn't be clearer. On one side is the PGA Tour, offering carefully worded responses and controlled narratives about unity, tradition, and progress. On the other is Daly, speaking in plain terms about fairness, respect, and the people the system often overlooks. That imbalance feeds a growing perception that the tour is more focused on protecting its image than understanding its audience. And when fans sense that disconnect, trust erodes quietly but quickly. This is why Daly's voice carries cultural weight. He represents an older generation of golf, one that values character over branding and honesty over optics. As modern golf becomes increasingly political and corporate, Daly feels like a reminder of what the sport used to be and what some fans fear it's losing. And when nostalgia meets frustration, it creates a powerful response that institutions ignore at their own risk. It's important to understand that John Daly's comments are not the problem facing professional golf. They are a symptom of it. The frustration he voiced didn't appear overnight, and it didn't originate with him. Instead, it reflects a growing sense that parts of the sport have moved faster in appearance than in substance. When a system is healthy, criticism sounds isolated. When it isn't, criticism starts to echo. What Daly's remarks reveal most clearly is unrest beneath the surface. Not rebellion, not collapse, but discomfort, the kind that builds when voices feel unheard and concerns feel deferred. Alongside that unrest is a widening credibility gap between how the PGA Tour presents itself and how it's increasingly perceived. The tour speaks the language of progress and unity, but moments like this expose tension between messaging and experience. And once that gap becomes visible, it becomes difficult to ignore. This puts pressure on the PGA to respond, not with statements, but with substance. Reform doesn't always arrive through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives through moments of uncomfortable clarity. Daly didn't demand change. He highlighted imbalance. Whether the tour chooses to interpret that as criticism or as insight will shape its next chapter. Institutions rarely change because they're attacked. They change because they realize silence is no longer protection. The real question now isn't about Daly at all. It's about what comes next. Will the PGA listen and adapt before frustration hardens into division? Or will more players, current, former, and future, begin to speak with the same candor? Because when someone like Daly speaks this plainly, he's not asking to be heard. He's warning that others already are.